everyone. I think I know everyone here actually, which is great. Um, I am Alex with Alaska Fisheries Development Foundation, and for the recording's sake, I'll share that we're the sub-awardee managing the Joint Innovation Projects Program, which is part of the research and development component of the Alaska Mariculture Cluster Build Back Better Regional Challenge grant. So the idea for this meetup here is to give the Joint Innovation Project leads a chance to share on what they've been working on, any challenges, successes they've had so far, and just to provide an opportunity to for everyone to connect on work that might have synergies. And we have quite a few projects today. This session will probably run a little bit shorter than the next one on August 4th, but I am still going to, try to keep time, and just generally presenters have 10 minutes total, with about 5 minutes presenting, about 5 minutes Q&A. You can go over that presentation time by a couple of minutes, but I'll give you a warning, or I'll turn my camera back on probably about the 7 minutes if we start to go over, just to make sure that we can have some time for everyone to engage. And we'll just start with Marcos here. We have Premium Aquatics starting with their project on solar drying of Alaskan seaweed and juice as a sustainably sourced layer hen feed ingredient. So I'll let you take it away, Marcos, and then just once more, if everyone could have their microphone on mute during the presentations, that would be great. I appreciate that.
So thank you very much, Alex, and thank you all for being here. I'll try to make quick of this. Can you see the presentation on the screen? Oh, great. So this is a project between Seagrove, WWF, Wilcox Farms, which is primarily a chicken operation that produces eggs in Washington, and the University of Arizona, and Dr. Gagi Davidowitz. And this was really Ellen's, I think, brainchild. Thank you, Ellen, for joining us. And she facilitated all the connections of all the people to make this happen. I really appreciate that. So basically, there are multiple phases here. The first phase is we shipped about 52. This is to use seaweed dried in a solar dryer that was the proprietary system that was created by Gagi and the University of Arizona to dry seaweed and test the efficacy of that system. And then the second phase is to take that material, do a number of analyses with it, and also feed it to laying hens to ascertain its effectiveness as a substitute for one of the current additives that they're using for that hen laying. And Ellen, if feel free to jump in here. You know more about that side of it than I do. To offer any input. So we're in the first phase here. The university is working. There's 5 steps. Signed a contract with them. They're using the drying tower that develop an efficient thawing process. As we all know, drying from frozen is not going to be the future. We're going to dry from fresh. So this is a step that's informative, but frankly, we would be foolish to include that in a future commercial application. Efficiently drying in the solar tower, and grinding and processing of the seaweed. This is all Saccharina that we're using right now, that was grown in 2022 at our farm in Doyle Bay in Alaska. The University of Arizona hired 2 people, Hunter Clark and Joseph Lamatina. Hunter is a graduate student and actually is from Alaska, grew up in Soldotna and on St. Lawrence Island. So he's definitely got a connection to the project. So this is the drying tower. They had to do some upgrades to it. So this allow this system to be able to dry the kind of volume that they're doing. This was not built for kelp specifically. They were drying insects initially, and the idea is to take this same system and utilize it for drying seaweeds. So the part of the project is they built all of these trays to be able to hang and dry the kelp in this drying facility. You can see on the left here, this in this little shed is a dehydrator, that a dehumidifying area to be able to pull that moisture out of the air as it's drying. This is some of our sugar kelp from trucked in from Alaska that they've done about a dozen. They're working on on other methods to dry it. They've initially started just putting it in the dryer in blocks, and that didn't work as well as they had hoped. So now they're doing a pre-drying phase, which is available in the summer in Tucson. So and so they've been spending a fair amount of time trying to develop those techniques. So you can see here these trays where they're drying the sugar kelp. This is after it's it started the drying process. They spread it in the trays in the tower. Of course, if we were doing this from wild, we wouldn't do the thawing step at all. We'd just take that kelp and put it directly on the trays. You can see the wet and then the dried afterwards. So one of the things that we have is sugar kelp contains high levels of mannitol, a sugar alcohol, which has made it more challenging and taking more time to dry the product than we found with the same system using ribbon kelp. So when they dried some of our retail ribbon kelp, and you can see there's quite a substantial difference in the amount of time that it took to dry the two different kinds of kelp. And you can see this is how the kelp comes in on the left in these frozen blocks, and this is what the dried kelp looks like on the backside. We've been seeing about 5.1% recovery on those. So 10 totes of dried kelp, 10 totes of dried kelp produces 1 tote of 10 totes of frozen produces 1 tote of dried. We're getting the water content down to below 3%, water activities down to 0.2. So very effective. Finding ways to reduce the kelp. Right now they're using to kind of flake that we need is they're using a concrete mixer, and they can reduce that volume by 75% in an hour just by tumbling it in the concrete mixer with these bolts. So, and then starting this week, they're going to test a rotating system, which hopefully will allow them to dry more totes per week. So hopefully we'll get this product dried by the end of the summer, and and then be able to move that product up to Washington to be used do that analysis and use it in that trial with one of those flocks of hens to test its efficacy. Ellen, did you have anything you might want to add to this?
Yeah, Wilcox Farms is totally organic, so they're excited about the possibility of using seaweed as one of the ingredients. And what they're looking at, and I'm not sure it's going to pan out, but we have to look, is to see if they can replace some of the most expensive supplement for pigment to color the yolks. If they can get that out of seaweed, that's what they're really hoping for from a production perspective. We know it's going to be helpful for gut health from other studies with poultry, but don't know about the pigmentation yet. So that's what we're really targeting.
Well, and I think, from my perspective, I think, a bulk feed is a less valuable product form than something that's a supplement for this, because, to be able to produce enough kelp to feed large flocks of chickens when you have billions of chickens in the U.S., is pretty challenging at our scale. But to be able to produce a component that's an inclusion in the feed for another purpose could be a really intriguing market, which is one of my primary interests in this. If we could demonstrate the efficacy, there's an opportunity here to be a, produce a specialized product specifically for this application.
Yep.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcos. Does anyone have any specific questions? It looks like we have one in the chat. Elizabeth, I can go ahead. It looks like she uses Wilcox Farm eggs.
My connection is not very good, so I just wanted to make sure you could see my comment. But I think it would be a pretty cool way to do a value-added product where we get to bring it back to Alaska, since our Costco's now are carrying the Wilcox Farm eggs.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, one other thing is the dryer that model, maybe because of the fan, the way they have that tower and the vertical drying, may also be adaptable to Alaska, particularly rural areas where there's not a lot of power, or where they want to be able to dry it efficiently with a system like that. So that's another intriguing part of this project, is demonstrate efficacy for seaweed.
Yeah, even though you may not have the temperatures in Hawaii or in Alaska, sorry, you definitely have long daylight hours. And this particular design really collects the sunlight. And because it's vertical, the temperature gradient at the top it's over, I think that was over a 30 degrees Celsius change. So they told us when they first started testing, by the time they got even the seaweed loaded onto the trays, the top ones were already dried to the touch.
Oh, wow.
When they got to the bottom of that, and they hadn't even put it up on top where the hot air was.
Okay.
So it's exciting.
Maybe, do you want to go ahead? You have a question?
Yeah, that was actually part of my question, is adaptability to the environment in Alaska. And we've been drawing seaweed in a high tunnel for 4 years now. And what we find is that if the sun is out at all, like even if it's a little bit of an overcast, hazy day, we get some drying. But if the sun isn't out, it's not effective at all. And one of my thoughts is, I don't know if you've connected at all with Get to Hailu or any of the people at UAA or UAF who are working on drying systems, but Get to Hailu at UAA might be a really good person to connect with your folks at UAA.
Yeah.
At Arizona.
UAA.
Just because he's been looking, Get2 has been looking at drying systems for Alaska climates, and it might, in specifically solar drying systems. So that might be a really interesting conversation in terms of adaptability.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Evie. There's a question, is the end product food grade? The answer is no. The product going into the dryer is food grade. And in fact, it was organic when it was, we had organic certification at the time that it was produced. Oh, actually, no, this was not. We got our certification right at the end of the season, so this was not organic. But the process was organic. It just, the date or certificate was after this was produced. But because the dryer and the facility is not food grade permitted, that's the only reason it's not. But it certainly could be.
One last question before we switch over is what's the percentage of kelp in the final product? Maybe you went over this before.
The inclusion rate at the
the inclusion rate.
I don't know that we know the answer to that.
Okay.
No.
Because we haven't done the trial.
No.
All right,
It's going to be low. I mean, yeah.
But it's such a massive market that at scale it's still yeah. Well, thank you so much. For time's sake, we're going to move on to the next presentation, but I appreciate both of your times, Ellen and Marcos, and I know you're taking off for the ferry, Marcos, but thank you so much.
I'm sorry I have to run, and I would have loved to have listened to the rest of the presentations, and I'll look for it on the on the recorded. But thank you all very much for your time, and thank you, Alex, and thank you, Alan, for coming. And I think you just came back from Africa or something, so you're probably still jet lagged, but appreciate the time.
I got back yesterday, but I don't have too much problem with it, so this is good.
All right,
Oh,
great.
very good. All right. Well, thank you all.
Thanks,
Have a great day.
Marcos. Evie, did you want me to share my screen? Have yours pulled up here. Either way is fine with me, whatever's easier for you.
Sure, why don't you just go ahead and do it?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay.
All right.
Great.
Can everyone see my screen? So we have, Saltwater Inc. and Regeneration North and the Kachemak Kelp Innovation Hub presenting on their project expanding markets through differentiation, new species, and product lines.
Great. Thanks, Alex. For those of you I don't know, I'm Evie Witten. I'm with Regeneration North, and I'm co-PI on this project with Catherine Caravano, who's also on the call with Saltwater Inc. I'll go through these first slides pretty quickly, but important to point out here that this project was in collaboration with four farms in the Kachemak Bay region, Spinnaker Sea Farms, Ebb Tide, Snug Harbor, and Island Passage Farm. A little bit of overlap here. I am also one of the farmers for Ebb Tide Ocean Farm. So I'm going to speak to this project sort of wearing two different hats. Okay, next slide. So this project, I just wanted to put it in a little bit of context. This builds on a number of other projects that we have carried out at the Kachemak Kelp Innovation Hub over the last 4 years, all looking at ways to connect different methods to perfect and connect different methods of stabilizing kelp with different markets. So we've been working on drying kelp, we've been working on fermentation and plant biostimulant production. We've been working on some preliminary investigations on kelp in skincare. So this adds to a kind of growing body of work. Okay, next slide. The four components of this particular project, again, kind of drawing on previous projects. So I think, on the face of it, it sort of, I looked at it again and thought, wow, it looks a little bit like the kitchen sink, but there's a rhyme and reason to it all. So the first component was supporting local farms and nurseries to grow novel species. The second part was to take those novel species and experiment with drying them. Important to point out, like Marcos just um, uh, provided details about, the mannitol content and sugar kelp being different enough from alaria that they dry differently. And that's definitely one of the things that we have observed and had to adjust for in the past. So part of the drying new species was to really try to understand the characteristics of those species in the stabilization environment. Similarly, we've been salting kelp or salt preserving kelp for a number of years, and we wanted to go through that same process with novel species, as well as perfecting our methods for sugar kelp and alaria. And then finally, to further our research and development on plant biostimulant production. Next slide. So the first piece of it, supporting the farms and nurseries, I think I'll just say up front, was a little bit of a humbling experience. Our objective was to collect 5-ribbed, 3-ribbed, and split kelp. And from the very get-go, we had a hard time finding 5-ribbed when we were out collecting sorus, even though we had gone out and scouted earlier in the summer. But the time of sorus collection, we couldn't find the 5-ribbed. We had divers as well as us farmers in the water, and we made a kind of that day decision to collect sieve kelp instead because it was really plentiful. And it was in a bay next to one of the farms, and we thought this may be worth trying. We had hoped to work with 2 different nurseries to spread the risk of seed string failure and also to increase learning. And when it came down to it, the only nursery that was available to us was Aluptic Pride, which was terrific. Alaska Ocean Farms, unfortunately, was having technical difficulties at that moment and couldn't follow through with the initial commitment. And then we reached out to every single other nursery in the state, and then nobody had capacity or equipment on hand. So we ended up working just with one nursery. And that was also a little humbling. We had some questions about spore release when it came right down to it at the nursery with these new species. And we also had we had pretty good but not terrific seed growth on the seed spools. And then we also had some limited but still some contamination issues that we didn't understand well. Um, when it came to growing it out on the farms, we had weak but detectable growth of the three-rib kelp both at Spinnaker and at Island Passage Farm. And then we had sparse, I shouldn't say sparse, it was actually kind of thick but emerging growth of split kelp on Ebb Tide Ocean Farm and Snug Harbor. We were growing together this past year. But that was it. We didn't have any sieve kelp growth on any of the farms. And the three rib didn't grow on our site, and the split kelp didn't grow at Spinnaker or Island Passage. So pretty spotty growth. And you can see here this photograph in the corner is the split kelp growing on the Ed Tide and Snug Harbor site. It was coming in really well, but it was very young, and it was barely detectable when we looked at the lines in March and April. And this photograph was taken mid-May. Okay, next slide. Oh, I'm not sure why that's showing up like that. Well, that's okay. I can just talk to it. The slide isn't exactly as was supposed to be, but so we went through and essentially experimenting with drawing the new species was also a pretty limited experience because we didn't have a lot to work with. We did harvest several, I think 618 pounds in total of the three-ribbed kelp. That dried well in the high tunnel and in our EnviroPack electric dryer. However, what we discovered was that it came in beautiful and robust, and it looked great for about 24 hours. And by 36 hours or so, it was degrading quickly, even when kept in recirculating 45-degree seawater. So what we discovered about that species for handling and for stabilization is that you have to stabilize it very quickly, which really limits its utility, I think, as a commercial species. We also brought in some wild set on oyster gear and kelp lines of the five-ribbed, though we were not able to cultivate it. We also experimented with drying that, and that dried easily and well in both of our available dryers. Okay, next slide. The salted kelp products, we use this opportunity to really refine the methods and to experiment. Last season, we used several different kinds of salt. So we experimented with different grain size and different flake configuration, essentially. Um, we have lab analyses in progress right now to test. We know we have a shelf-stable product from tests that we conducted last year, but now we are looking at leaving it out of refrigeration for different lengths of time to find out how shelf-stable it is outside of refrigeration. The water activity suggests and we have some food product literature that tells us it theoretically is shelf stable out of refrigeration, but we want to test that and have better data on it. The marketing of that species has been fairly local so far, but very successful. It's sold out in 8-ounce retail packages at the Salmon Sisters shop in Homer. And we have 3 local restaurants using it with a lot of success in different recipes. Okay, next slide. And then finally, the R&D on the plant biostimulant products. This work, after we had already started this JIP, we were awarded another grant under the Mariculture Clusters Ag Products RFP to continue work on this as well. So the work under the JIP got combined with that much broader scope of work, which allowed us to really expand this whole project. So we ran trials with both sugar kelp and mixed species wild set kelps, and we tested 14 different combinations of variables that are important in our fermentation method. We processed about 8,500 pounds of kelp and produced 5,000 plus liters of plant biostimulant. We have expanded lab analyses going in progress at the moment, including mung bean model studies looking at shoot and root growth at different concentrations and under different, essentially different recipes of our plant biostimulant. And then under the Ag Products Grant, we also have farm trials under progress right now at two different farms in Alaska, the experimental farm in Fairbanks and a commercial farm in Homer. So this is very much a work in progress and a bigger project than we intended, but pretty exciting. And then last slide, just a few really high level takeaways at this point. As far as the new species, again, it was humbling, and I would say that from collection through the nursery cultivation to growing out on the farms, we have a lot to learn, and I think the whole community would really benefit from more basic knowledge of life histories, and that we really need to take a step back and learn more so that we can try this in different ways. I think one of our other lessons there was that there's a real opportunity cost for the farmers if the new species don't grow. That we had a lot of feet of line between the three farms dedicated to the new species that didn't grow. But we're also finding that there's at least local market interest in the new species. Again, the salted kelp, it's labor intensive, but very reliable stabilization method. There's local market interest, and that's something we're going to continue. Drying new species, again, we want to continue that work. And we find that there is a lot of difference species to species in drying. So I think that's important work. And the plant biostimulant work, again, is ongoing. I think the only thing I would add is that this sounds silly, but it's something we were told by, I think, everyone we consulted before the season that we should use IBC totes for production and for storing the biostimulant. And at the end of the season, what I would say is I would recommend to anyone at this point to stay away from the IBC totes, except for your final liquid product. That we had an immense amount of time involved in trying to deal with those, getting shredded kelp in and out of those totes and modifying the totes. So a minor detail, but important, I think, if other people are working in this way.
Still on mute. Thank you so much. That's really interesting about the IBC totes. I'll leave it open for questions, but I have one first off. Do you think that you'll continue to grow some of these other species?
That's part of an active discussion right now. I think we have interest. I think the split kelp, especially, would be interesting to continue. One of the things that both Island Passage Farm and Spinnaker found is that they had a lot of wild set recruitment of the three-ribbed, and Spinnaker said more than they've seen in previous years. So we wondered if introducing more three-rib on the site led to more recruitment. We don't really know. But one of the things there is that with the three-ribbed, maybe we can get enough wild set off of local farms that we don't need to cultivate it. The split kelp is a really nice species for drying. It's got some really nice qualities, and I think in talking to a few biologists about it, I think we need to really understand the life history better, and that it might be at a different harvest schedule. But I think that's worth further. I have an interest in continuing that work.
Cam, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, hi Evie. I was just curious if you outplanted the three rib as you would with sugar kelp or ribbon kelp, or did you do sort of a different outplant for the different species? Date, that is.
We did the same date for all of them, and we'd had some discussion about that early in the season, and just logistically the way it all played out, both there at APMI and for us on the other end. It was the growth was really slow in the nursery, and so we didn't outplant until a few days before Thanksgiving. It was late. So
Cool, thank you.
yeah. But that's a really good question. I'd love to know if you have insights on that. It would be really interesting to dig into that.
All right, thank you so much. I think for time, we'll move on, although I don't see any sequester representatives here. We had switched one project over to August 4th, so maybe there was some confusion there. So I might have Cameron, I might have you go ahead and go next if that's all right, and I will message them to see if either of them can join.
Yep, that is. Here we go. Let me just set that up.
All right, so yeah. Cameron's representing the Chugach Regional Resources Commission and Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute for his project building capacity for gametophyte generation and direct seeding techniques for sugar kelp.
Yeah, hey everyone. So good to see you guys here. My name is Cameron. My name is Cameron Jardell, and today I'll be presenting, well, what Alex just told you about. So I'll save some time and get right into it. So to give you guys a little bit of background, Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute is a tribal affiliated organization based down in Seward, Alaska, where we serve 7 constituent tribes around the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound areas. And for the last few years, we've been providing commercial kelp seed to many of the kelp farms around the state, but have been looking for ways to improve both our capacity and just our ability for seed production. And that led to ultimately my hiring and the development of our dedicated gametophyte lab. Can you guys see the screen okay? Like it's, or are the pictures looking like they're really cut off? They all right?
I see everything clearly.
Okay, sorry, just on mine it looks a little odd. So our JIP project, what and why? Through our own observations and correspondence with other hatcheries, we've noted some limitations in spore seeding, including variable sporophyte density, limited genetic traceability, and potentially reduced growth performance compared to techniques using gametophytes, which have seen success in some areas internationally. While in Alaska, generally speaking, we've been lacking in our capacity for research in commercial scale gametophyte production and seeding. So that brought us to our 2 objectives, which is to optimize gametophyte husbandry protocols for sugar kelp and to establish direct seeding protocols to achieve optimum sporophyte density and to achieve optimum gametophyte seeding and consistent sporophyte density.
Cam, I'm not sure if your screen, if the slides are changing. Is that an issue for anyone else or is that just me?
Oh, I have been changing them. Uh-oh.
Not changing on my end either.
Here, does that help?
Yes.
Yes.
There we go. Thank you. Sorry for the
no, you're all good. I felt like something was wrong, so I brought it up. Let me get back to. Here we go. Is that?
We're on the what and why.
Okay, now I'm not. Okay, hold on. Okay, yep, we're back. Everyone see the what and why?
Yes.
And how about now?
Still
No?
on the same slide.
Weird. Okay, one sec. Sorry, guys.
Oh, no worries. And I'm not sure if you had sent this part over to me or not. I think I just have the other report.
No, I didn't. I can, but I'd really like to.
You could try to stop and start again, and sometimes if you're in
Yeah, let's do that.
The app or whatever application you're in versus the full screen sometimes makes a difference. Or you can send it to me real quick and I can go ahead for you.
Yeah, let me have a go.
Okay, so now it is cut off like you were saying earlier.
Yeah. You know what? Let me just send this to you.
Okay.
Sorry about that, everyone.
No, you're all good. That's the full screen now.
Yeah, my issue is I can't show it full screen and also access it myself
Okay.
to control which slide the slides. Unless, huh? Did that work?
That's changing now. It is just still slightly cut off, but I
It's
wonder.
still cut off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm gonna stop sharing for a sec.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, I'm sorry. This is super odd. I've not had this happen in this way. All right, that's sent over. Hey, sorry, Alex actually sent a previous draft. I'm sending the right one now.
Okay. We're almost there.
Right, there we go.
Okay, hopefully this works. Can everyone see the full screen?
Yep.
All right, okay.
Zoom through. There we go.
We're going through. Okay.
All right, so I brought the, yep, I think the next slide was where we were
Okay.
at.
Okay.
Perfect.
Cool.
All right, thank you so much. So for objective one, we conducted this experiment in spring looking at how does initial gametophyte density affect growth and reproduction of mixed-sex gametophyte cultures. And the goal was to see if we could use density as a control for reproduction instead of using red light to potentially increase our growth rates in our cultures. So last fall, we went to Jackalov Bay and established some mixed-sex gametophyte cultures, which we incubated through the fall and winter. We then diluted the gametophytes to 4 density treatments that you can see in that second photo there. These were then put into 2 24 well plates in an incubator running at 12 degrees Celsius. And you can see there's that little orbital vortex there to provide a little bit of water motion. And these were also distributed according to an irradiance gradient that was present among the wells. So these were grown for 6 days under red light as sort of a recovery period after fragmentation, and then 14 days under white light. And at the end of the experiment, the gametophytes were removed from their wells, placed into these packed cell volume tubes that you can see there on the last photo. And then we could use gametophyte volume to estimate our end biomass. If you could. Next slide, please. There we go. So our objective 1 results from this, we found specific growth rate to decrease with increasing starting density up to about 0.17 milligrams per milliliter dry weight. And we also saw no sexual reproduction in any of our density treatments. Now, this was remarkably similar to results from a paper on European sugar kelp gametophytes, which indicates that this may be a fairly reliable method across different populations of sugar kelp, where an optimum density would be between 0.04 and 0.06 milligrams per milliliter of dry weight. So yeah, we wanted to assess temperature with this as well, but ran into some technical difficulties, and so we're definitely going to be continuing to look down this path for as a viable option. Next slide, please. So moving on to objective 2, this is looking at some direct seeding trials in an in-lab wave tank that's currently under construction here at APMI. And we want to know how rope scuffing and the use of a binder affect post-settlement sporophyte density in a turbulent flow environment. And we also want to know if the effects change based on starting gametophyte density. And so here we're going to be looking at induced gametophyte seeding with a binder or without. We're going to be looking at scuff ropes, which is just sandpaper over our grow lines to increase surface area versus no scuffing. And then we've got a high and a low gametophyte density treatment. And then we're also going to be looking at that over a turbulence gradient within the tank. So that will be occurring here in the next couple weeks. Next slide, please. You can move on from that. Thank you. So we've also expanded our project with the Sea Quality Improvement Grant under the Southeast Conference, which allows us to assess this whole process holistically, starting with gametophyte propagation and hatchery techniques to our seeding trials, which we're going to then extend to ocean seeding trials this fall to really see how these protocols hold up in the marine environment. So that's, quite exciting. You can go to the next slide, please. So in summary, we have ground-tested methods to continue experimentation. We have well-developed gametophyte stocks now and a pretty solid amount of biomass. So we've got 2 mixed sex stocks that are running in the bioreactors as well as isolated clonal cultures. We also have funding for the direct seeding experiments, including the ocean outplant that will take place shortly. We now have operational seaweed bioreactors that drastically increase our capacity for research in a way that's applicable to commercial scale production. And we have genetic samples logged for the Fish and Game Genetics Lab to inform policymakers regarding the implementation of these techniques in the kelp industry in the future. There we go, thanks. So I'd like to thank our technical advisors, Scott Lindell and Dan Gassard over at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute for all their help and their expertise on gametophytes. And with that, I will take any questions. Thanks for your patience.
Does anyone have any questions off the bat? Evie, you're on mute.
Thanks. Where are you outplanting? Where are those experiments going to take place?
Oh, great question. So we've got an experimental site currently under the permitting process in Kasitzna Bay and then also one in Jacklove Bay. And so with those, we're collaborating with the NOAA lab there and Spinnaker Sea Farms.
Oh, great.
Awesome. Angie?
Hi. So my question is for the outplanting experiments you're planning for the fall. Are you planning on outplanting gametophytes that you cultivated collected and cultivated last year, or do you have to restart with the gametophyte stock from this year?
So I actually established a new stock in May that I plan to use. Yeah. I thought about testing both, but we've got enough variables as it is.
Well, I'm excited to hear about the results. The outplanting is happening in the next couple months. Is that right?
Yeah, we'll be outplanting in late October, early November. Pretty consistent outplanting time frame.
All right. Well, if there are no further questions, we can keep moving. And yeah, feel free to utilize the chat. I don't think that anyone from Sequester's joining. So
I saw Johnny on his iPhone briefly.
Yeah, I think he popped in and popped out, and then I just got a text message from Liv. So I think we'll have both of they have two projects, so we'll have them both on the 4th. I may have to extend that meeting an extra half hour or so to accommodate everyone. It's been tricky working around everyone's summer schedules, but here we are. So I might just move ahead to our last project presentation for the day, and this is through UAF, from hatchery to harvest, examining the effects of different hatchery environments throughout the bull kelp life cycle. And Mike and Angie.
Yeah, so Angie's going to give the talk for us.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike.
Cool. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, let me know if it isn't changing for whatever reason. But yeah, no, excited to talk to you guys about our project from hatchery to harvest, which is a massive collaboration between a bunch of us. I was previously with the Alaska Fisheries Science Center, but now Prince William Sound Science Center, UAF team, Alaska Ocean Farms, Kelp Island, Alaska, and Sequester. So the overall problem that we were originally trying to solve with this grant was the fact that while the abiotic limits of kelp growth at the microscopic stage are somewhat understood, there's still a lot we don't know about how to optimize growth of bull kelp in hatcheries, especially in terms of light and temperature, and how different hatchery conditions may affect the final growth and yield of seaweed farms at harvest. So with this problem statement, we were kind of looking to grow bull kelp and address a few different goals. So first, we wanted to assess how varying temperature and light levels influence microscopic bull kelp growth and development in hatchery stage. And the specific problem that was kind of influencing this goal was just the fact that it's pretty standard for hatcheries in Alaska to be growing their kelp gametophytes at about 11 degrees Celsius. But at the time that we're growing the kelp, the actual oceanic conditions that we're probably outplanting our kelp into is probably more around the area of 4 to 5 degrees Celsius. So do we really need to be spending that energy to increase the temperature in the hatchery, which kind of led us into our second goal to figure out how that might affect the cost and energy uses. And then our third goal was to determine how the growth and harvest of adult bull kelp is affected by different hatchery conditions. And so again, while bull kelp has been studied in terms of light and temperature tolerances to some degree, there is still a lot we don't know about how light and temperature affect the growth of it throughout this entire stage. So the reason we were calling it hatchery to harvest is we were trying to really make that connection between how do conditions at the hatchery stage really affect the conditions once we're harvesting the bull kelp. So to do this, we set up a really intense factorial design experiment. So this is a lot of colors on the thing, but essentially what we're doing is we decided to run this experiment in 2 different locations. So one in Kodiak and one in Juneau. So both of these were factorial design experiments. We're crossing 3 different temperatures with a few different light conditions. So in Kodiak, we were crossing our 3 different temperatures with 4 different light conditions. So 2 standard light condition, or 2 static light conditions, so just keeping it at 30 micromoles the entire time or 60 micromoles the entire time. And then 2 dynamic light conditions where we would increase the light slowly over the course of the experiment. And then Juneau was running more or less the same experiment, but they were not running the static light experiments. They were not running the dynamic light treatments. They were just using the static ones. But yeah, we were able to conduct this in Kodiak with the help of Lexa Meyer from Alaska Ocean Farms, and then Mike Steckel's team at UAF in Juneau was doing the Juneau portion of this experiment. So after actually growing all our kelp under these different conditions, how did it actually go? Well, we kind of had some mixed reviews. So Kodiak was pretty successful getting gametophyte growth in all treatments, but there was a lot of variation in the quality of the kelp spools produced. So just looking at these photos, we can see that there are pretty significant differences between our 5, 8, and 11 degrees treatments. So just talking about the 8-degree treatment first, we did have something go wrong with our treatments for that, where for some reason the gametophytes were just like massively delayed and at growing at way lower densities than our 5 and 11 degree treatment, but they did eventually start growing way later in the treatment. But we were dealing with overall lower densities in this treatment for some reason. Our 5-degree treatment actually was pretty good, and at the time of outplanting actually had a pretty decent seed cover with clear sporophytes growing. And then our 11-degree treatment was actually growing very fast. So it matured and was producing sporelings way earlier than the 5-degree treatment. And the reason it's like almost black looking right now is that 2 weeks before we went to outplant, we actually had a pretty decent cover of sporophytes, but that 2 weeks extra that we kept it in the hatchery ended up being too long. And so all the little sporophytes that we grew ended up washing off, and only like gametophytes were remaining. And what you can see is a pretty thick coat. So we're seeing some pretty significant differences in the effect of at least our temperature treatments in this. Juno, on the other hand, had pretty successful settlement, but for some reason the gametophytes they were growing never really germinated. They just kept growing vegetatively, which we can see with the little puffball gametophytes covering the spools at outplanting. So just like looking at the hatchery results, these are graphs of percent cover in the 2 locations with the different treatments. And overall, it seems like Juno had pretty significantly higher spool coverage at highlight, regardless of temperature. It's a little bit similar at the 5-degree treatment, but there's clearly highlight had a positive effect at the 8-degree and 11-degree treatment. In Kodiak, our spool coverage tended to depend more on temperature than light. I already addressed like why the 8-degree Celsius treatment was so low. There was something going on with that treatment, so we're probably going to exclude that for future statistical analysis. Just because something did go wrong. But then our 11-degree treatment, we had extremely high spool coverage, almost 100% for every single spool, whereas our 5-degree treatment was a little bit less. And there doesn't really seem to be a clear effect of light. So within the Kodiak treatment, we also looked at sporophyte lengths. And overall, like it doesn't seem like there's a really clear pattern for how long, for the size of the sporophytes at outplanting. There's not really a really strong pattern of temperature. There's not really a strong pattern of light. And again, like I think 11-degree would have been higher if the sporophytes hadn't washed off before we outplanted them. And then the 8-degree Celsius, because it had lower coverage, it seemed like they might have had a little bit more space for the sporophytes to grow, which is why we have some of those higher sporophyte lengths there. So anyway, once we had these spools, then we were able to outplant them. And so we put together this spreader bar array. This one is actually not the accurate array, but it was more or less like that, where we had 3 blocks. And in each of those blocks, we outplanted 30. We were only outplanting our kelp that grew at the static treatments, not the dynamic treatments. And we had 3 replicates for each light and temperature combination. And so these were outplanted at Sequester Farms in Juneau and Kelp Island, Alaska in Kodiak. So how did these harvest results grow? Short answer is not great. Juneau didn't see any kelp grow at all, whereas in Kodiak we had very sparse kelp coverage, but we were able to harvest about 42,000 kilograms of wet weight, albeit that is wet weight. So like there was I didn't do quite as good a job removing some of the excess water as I could have, so it would be a much lower weight when dried. But you can see in the photo on the right that we were still getting pretty good sized bull kelp, so with some thick stipes, and we were getting a lot of blade material for sure. So even though our kelp coverage was very sparse, so the photo on the left shows one of our early checks where we were oh, there's really not much growing at all. I was pleasantly surprised by what we were able to see for harvest. And so looking at the harvest results for Kodiak, it seems like kelp grown at 5 degrees Celsius had significantly higher density and yield at kelp grown at 8 degrees Celsius or 11 degrees Celsius. Actually, okay, before I talk about that, let me go back to why it didn't go great. Regardless of Juneau and Kodiak, both areas seemed like both areas were seeing results that looked like almost all the kelp seed that got washed off. So all those like baby sporophytes that we're seeing, even in like the 5-degree treatment in Kodiak, we were no longer seeing when we went to check it a month later. So we were kind of wondering like if we were going to see any kelp grow at all. And so obviously Juneau didn't see any kelp grow at all. Kodiak was able to see some, but we were kind of really intrigued by the fact that all of our kelp seemed to disappear. Even if we had a good coverage seed line, it just managed to disappear over the course of the season. But from the kelp we were able to collect at the end, we then were able to analyze some of the those results for Kodiak. And in Kodiak, we saw that kelp grown at 5 degrees Celsius had a significantly higher density and yield than kelp grown at 8 degrees or 11 degrees Celsius. And so the reason I wanted to talk about that caveat with like seeing a lot of kelp washed off the line is that while we're seeing this interesting result where it's like, oh, interesting, like why is it growing better at 5 degrees Celsius? It is still really hard for us to say whether this was a direct result of the fact that we were growing the kelp at lower temperatures, or if it just so happens that the 5 degrees Celsius somehow managed to hold on to their kelp way better than the 8 degrees or 11 degrees. So we're hoping to rerun this experiment this fall just to kind of clarify that and see whether we're able to replicate these results and whether there actually is a benefit to growing bull kelp at lower temperatures or not. But if that is the case, like that's still really interesting because that's a significant difference from what's being used in standard hatchery practices at the moment. Yeah, and so those were just my caveats right there. And then the other thing we were doing is we also saw that there were really strong correlations between different bull kelp morphometrics. So this is a lot of graphs, but essentially we took a lot of different measurements from the bull kelp that we were able to harvest. So like looking at stipe length, blade length, bulb diameter, sub-bulb diameter. And what we were able to see that like with log transformations, there's actually really strong correlations. And so this is important just because sometimes it's really hard to monitor bull kelp as it's growing, it gets tangled. But if there are really strong correlations, that actually means that like it might be a lot easier to monitor it because maybe then we only need to take like one measurement instead of like all 6 to 8 measurements that might be important for harvest. So we're going to compare this to some results that Mike Steckel got in a paper he published a couple years ago and see whether this is a Kodiak specific trends that we're seeing or whether we can kind of create some sort of calculator for bull kelp monitoring that might make it easier going forward. So thinking a little bit more about why our kelp didn't grow, we're now kind of in the process of investigating a few follow-up questions. So first follow-up question is we had is how is the climate this year different than previous years? And so one, obviously it was a really warm winter across the state. And so this graph that I found, it shows like rank from like highest to lowest, like cloudiness scores across Alaska. And you can see that it's really dark gray over Kodiak. We had one of the cloudiest years on record. So maybe our kelp was just not growing because it was just not receiving nearly as much light as it usually does. So we're going to do a little bit more analysis into some climatic factors and see whether any of those like were significantly different for this year and may have had an impact on that reduced growth that we were seeing. Additionally, we're also wondering whether hatchery factors, for example, too frequent germanium dioxide additions or too low water motion might have reduced attachment strength of the kelp we outplanted. Did we outplant our kelp just for it to all get completely washed off the lines immediately? Is that the issue? So actually what we're doing right now is I have an intern in Kodiak this summer who's running a follow-up experiment looking at germanium dioxide addition frequency and different water motion. So far, it seems like we're not seeing a super significant effect of either of those two factors, at least like visually. But we're in the process of analyzing the data. And actually tomorrow we're going to be doing tests to look at the adhesion strength of kelp grown under different conditions to see if, different ways of growing bull kelp might make it more likely to stay on the line once we outplant it. And then our last question is, did the 5 degrees Celsius kelp actually grow better in Kodiak or not? As I mentioned, we're hoping to retrial the Kodiak portion of this project this winter to see if the results can be repeated or not. And with that, that is the end of my presentation, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much. This is really interesting. So you're planning to just retrial in Kodiak and not in Juneau?
Yeah, we need to talk to the team about it. So I think Kodiak is probably going to be the most important to retry because that's the one we actually got results from when growing on the farm. But I still do need to talk to some people in Juneau and see whether they want to redo it or not.
Is there how much of a difference in ocean temperature between Juneau and Kodiak? Like, what are the fluctuations in those different locations? Or I don't know.
That's a good question. I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head. Mike might be able to chime in more, or maybe somebody else on this call. But I do know that Juneau is more estuarine influenced, and so it does have a little bit more fluctuation, whereas we're a little bit more consistent in Kodiak, just in terms of in terms of climate regimes, because we have more marine influence. But yeah, I'm not sure if Mike, you have anything more to say about that.
Not yet.
Okay. Cool.
Evie, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you for that, Angie. That was really interesting and makes me think we have a lot of the same questions for what happened with the species that we were trying, and like why did it just not show up at all? Like there were sporophytes on the seed line, and what happened in the interim. And I think there are a lot of really interesting questions to dig into there. So I'm glad you're doing that work.
Well, one thing that's interesting for us is that at the hatchery that Tenson was running, we grew bull kelp just fine. We weren't using the incubators, so I don't know what the deal is with that.
Yeah, that is a good caveat. So like the sequester farm, like array for like this experiment, they didn't see any kelp for this experiment, but they were still able to collect their commercial arrays. We're still successfully growing bull kelp. And so that's kind of why we're kind of investigating some of our hatchery practices to see what is it different about what we're doing relative to like the other hatcheries that might be causing the results we saw.
Cameron?
Yeah, hey, great talk, Angela. I may have missed this, but I was curious if you looked at sporophyte density on the lines between your treatments, between the 5C and the other treatments.
Yeah, so I did sorry, let me go back a few slides. Yeah, so our yield is actually a number of Mariculture kelp per line. And so this is the one that's kind of looking at density where, we're seeing massively more like higher numbers of bull kelp in our 5-degree treatments, and then very few in our 8-degree and 11-degree. But those were also like, again, like there were also those differences that we were seeing in the hatchery, which is why I also kind of want to redo the hatchery, where I want to figure out what happened wrong with the 8-degree. Like, let's see if we can figure that one out, and then hopefully not have the 11-degree sporophytes that we grow completely washed out by the time we outplant.
Yeah, and were those inverse to your the spools? Like the densities on the spools correlate to the densities of sporophytes on the outplant farm, or was it inverse?
Yeah, so that's a good question. That kind of like goes into like how I was quantifying density of the spools. So when I was quantifying the density of the spools, I was doing percent cover. So how much of the spools was covered by early stage bull kelp, and I was not distinguishing between sporophytes versus gametophytes. I was like, oh, if there's a gametophyte there, it's covered. If there's a sporophyte there, it's covered. And so like what we were saying for percent cover is that like we were seeing really high percent cover for 11 degrees because it's just completely coated with gametophytes. Whereas, the percent cover for 5 degrees was a little bit lower, but like you can clearly see that there's a lot more sporophytes as opposed to gametophytes there. So it's not fully but then like the 8-degree, that might actually be correlated with what we were seeing in terms of what on the line, because it's pretty low percent cover, and we also saw pretty low density on the lines we collected as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting. This is a really cool experiment. Do you think there's any temperature shock involved in your outplanting, or do you think it's mostly just long-term growth on the spools kind of forcing these results?
That's a good question, and like that might be something I might include a temperature shock question in the follow-up experiment we do this fall, because I think that could definitely be part of it. Right now my running hypothesis is that it was current and they were just not sticking, because even in like the let me go forward, like even in our oh gosh, even in like our follow-up experiment, you're still seeing like a bunch of like little sporophytes like floating around like in like our water motion experiment. So and like that's a regular thing in the hatchery, right? For some sporophytes to fall off, like that's pretty normal. But yeah, like how much of it is a yeah. So the trials we're going to do tomorrow are going to kind of determine like whether like the ones we're growing at higher water motion or maybe they stick on better. Maybe the ones at lower water motion don't stick on better. We'll see. I think that's part of the question we're trying to answer, and so I can't fully answer it at the moment. But yeah, it would be cool to see. It would also be cool to incorporate a temperature shock sort of trial and just like compare like, oh, like if we slowly decrease the temperature, does that increase our ability, like, and does that increase the how much kelp stays on the lines once we outplant it? That's a good question.
Well, thanks for the info.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how this next trial goes.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, we have a shorter day today, so that's everyone that was signed up to present, and I appreciate everyone for giving their time and being engaged. And I will likely add a half an hour onto the August 4th sessions because we had to move some people around. So expect an invite for that. It'll go 2 hours instead of an hour and a half. If you have to come in and out, that's fine. We'll just try to give everyone else the same amount of time. And thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you all in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.